Hey there, and welcome to the July live stream. I had to do a few days late, but we are here. Don't worry, I will do one in August at the end of the month as well. But today I want to talk about best teaching practices since the new semester begins, in a few weeks for me at least. We start the 23rd this year. And so today I wanted to go over basically like two different blog posts that one actually it's been a few years already. The other one is much more recent. And I'm just gonna go through the tips on these particular posts and see, what's still relevant, what would I change, just my thoughts on what I had advised, way back when I first posted my top teaching tips, and then my more recent tips for high flex or hybrid teaching. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Let me go ahead and click over here. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me fine. Let me know if there's any issues with the audio or with the screen, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you this first blog post. So 10 teaching tips for the new college instructor. As you can see, right, 2018, so it has been a few years since this went up. But if we go down, one thing I did post is I created a series called Successful Start, Designing Your First Week of Class. And this is basically 5 blog posts as well as 5 videos, and then a free workbook, 60 plus pages, that you can get in my free resource library by signing up. And this one was, I think, 2 years ago when I created it. And I go through, how to create your syllabus, right? How to design your course schedule, how to figure out what major assignments you want to assign to your students, icebreaker ideas for your classes, as well as potentially doing a student self-assessment in the first week where you get a sense of where your students at the start, so you know how to tailor your materials for them going forward. So if you're brand new to teaching, I do recommend that series because it gives you a lot of detailed information on setting up those materials that you always share that first week of the semester. And of course, it's useful going through the whole 16 weeks of the semester or whatever system that you are using. So you can get that, through this particular blog post as well. But going down, the first element I had here was designing the course, right? Before the semester begins, if possible, design major assignments to include multiple options. So in this case, there's a kind of a twofold reason, I think, which is mentioned later on as well. But by giving them options, you're giving students more, feeling of empowerment, right? Like it's not just you have to do this, it's okay, well, the learning goal of the first assignment is to get a sense of your linear analysis skills to improve them. But you have an option. Do you want to analyze poems? Do you want to analyze fairy tales? Or do you want to analyze short stories? It's up to you to choose, right? And so that way, if you have a student who loves poetry, they're like, at least I get to, analyze poetry. Someone who's more of a fairy tale person, you know what? Fairy tales, I don't mind that much. And someone who enjoys short stories, like, great, I don't have to do poetry, I don't have to do fairy tales, I can do my favorite short story. So including options can be really helpful to get students more invested. So whenever you can, if there are assignments where you can have options, fantastic. You can also consider, depending on what you teach, maybe you have a more formal option versus a more creative option. So write a short paper or write a short story and have similar learning outcomes, right? So maybe you reflect on the story creation process in order to have that analytical element in the creative side, right? Or you can do the formal paper instead if you don't want to get that creative. So I do think that having options is great for student engagement, student interest. And I do have a video about 11 different ways of giving students options in your course. Now going on down, if you teach different courses in the same semester, schedule the assignment deadlines so they don't overlap with one another. Now, to clarify, different courses in the same semester, right? So I'm not saying different sections of the same course. In that sense, I think it's best to have the deadlines aligned because then you're teaching the same class the same way each time. It just makes life easier. But if you're teaching, ENC 1101, but then also ENC 125, in that case, rather than having, I'm going to get papers from every single class I teach on the same day or the same week, then kind of figure out, okay, I'm going to structure them so that there's not that huge overlap between them, that I do have a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks between major assignments in these various classes. Okay, so if you teach different courses, I do recommend having different assignment deadlines for major assignments. Now going down, create a balance between different types of major assignments so that students can feel confident about at least one of them. So in this case, again, in that successful start, I talk about different assignment types. So when you have here, you know what, I'm gonna have a paper, then I'm also gonna have a group project, I'm also gonna have an exam, right? I'm gonna have a creative assignment. So if you give variety, then you can have students who are like, okay, you know what, at least 80% of my grade isn't papers because I start with papers, only 30% is, right? Or only 20% is connected to an exam. Great, because I don't test well. The other side, the other elements I can do well on, and it will be okay. Okay, so consider balancing assignment types so that students can feel confident at least about one portion of what they are, doing for your class. Now, offer office hours at different times of the day, so there are multiple chances students can actually meet your assigned hours. Because if you do, okay, well, I'm doing Monday, Wednesday, 1 to 2 are my office hours, right? Or whatever the case may be. Well, if a student can make Monday at 1 because of the class, it's unlikely they'll be able to make Wednesday at 1 because it's probably a Monday, Wednesday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. So if you do, okay, Monday from 1 to 2, but then Wednesday from 4 to 5 after the class you teach, now there's 2 chances the student can make that office hour, right? Obviously, there's always going to be some students who can't make any office hours, and at that point, you do it by appointment when they need to speak to you. But this can be a way of decreasing the appointments outside of your office hours by giving variety in when your hours occur. Now, the first week of class, some tips here. Go through the whole syllabus with your students in person. I know some people think like there's no point because no one actually reads it. To me, that is the point, right? That's why you do it in person, because it's unlikely most of your students are not going to read it, at home. So if you do it in person, at least you have a chance of them absorbing the information on the syllabus. So I do think that, you don't have to read it word for word, but go through the most important elements of it. Here are the course goals, right? Here are the major assignments. Here's a grade breakdown. Here are the most important policies, okay? So I do think going through the syllabus on the first day is important because they're not going to read it on their own. So you might as well give them at least one chance of reading it during week 1. So I do think it's an important element to do on day 1 of class. After I introduce myself, a little bit about who I am, a little bit about what they can expect from the class, I dive into the syllabus, and then we move on to icebreakers and going over the LMS class website. That's basically my day 1 in a nutshell: syllabus, LMS, icebreakers. So discuss all the major assignments during add drop week. This can depend. I would say I do believe in this because, I want my students to know, hey, this is the course load. These are the major assignments. If this is not something you're interested in or you think you can do, drop my course and go to another one. Now, you still have time during add drop week. So I do give them at least a general sense of the major assignments so that they can make an informed decision of whether or not to stay in my class. Now, you don't necessarily go through the assignment sheets week 1. I have done that when I have older students, but freshmen might be a bit overwhelmed if you go through all the assignment sheets on week 1. But I do think having like, hey, here's what you can expect here. If this section of the course isn't for you, maybe you want to see your friends, ask them about their sections. If you prefer that design, see if there's a way of switching in, if there's any openings. So, not necessary to go over the assignment sheets necessarily, but I do think they should give a sense of, what, here are major assignments, here is what's expected of you. If this isn't for you, talk to your advisor, see if there's somewhere else that you can go, okay? So that's just a tip here of doing it during the add drop period. Now, make student names central to all icebreakers. This is key every semester. This is definitely a tip that has not aged at all because, yes, if you have 200 students in your lecture hall, you're never going to remember all their names, or if you can, more power to you. But if you have, 30, 40, even 50 students in a class, then potentially you might be able to remember all of them. In my case, my courses tend to be between 25 and 35 students. So I do memorize all my student names. And the way to get started really early on is by having names be central to your icebreakers. So if you do, for example, the I am too or me too, where you have a student say something about them and anybody else who that also applies to says me too or I am too, then you can have them say their name beforehand. So for example, hi, my name is Erica and I'm left-handed. And then you have a few me toos, and then I say, okay, you go next. And so that person says, hi, I'm Sarah, and I play guitar, and then me too's. So always have them say their name first, so you start memorizing their names and students start getting to know each other as well. So again, in the Successful Start, I do have, I think, 7 or 8 icebreakers mentioned. I have a whole playlist of icebreakers that I'll list below as well, in case you want to watch the playlist of icebreakers. But definitely make sure, if at all possible, names are included in your icebreakers so you can start getting to know your students' names as soon as possible, so you can start calling on them using their names as soon as possible. So here are 2 examples of icebreakers that focus on the name. Okay, then during the semester, so after you grade all submissions for an assignment, go through the grades and feedback to make sure there are no inconsistencies. In this case, this is especially speaking to me as an English professor. If you're teaching a math course and you're just having math exams, it doesn't really apply. But for papers, right, you can get started and you read the first few and you're like, all right, I'm in the zone, I'm doing this, no problems. You're in paper 50 to 55, now you're like, my God, I want this to get over with, right? When is it gonna be over? I've been grading for 5 hours straight. So that frustration, that tiredness can get into your grading system sometimes. So I really recommend grading as soon as you can. So don't wait, do 3 weeks of grading one assignment because you'll forgotten, what happened in week 1 by the time you hit week 3. So I do think you should do it in a short period of time. But once you finish them all, go back and say, okay, when I graded this on day 1 and a 93, right? Let me look at the comments that I gave to the student. And now on day 3, when I finish grading, here's a 93. Let me look at the comments. It should pretty closely match up what the expectation was to get a 93. And so if you realize, oh, I gave the student a 90, and it was very similar in comments, that's your tiredness, your frustration coming through. So in that case, then you have to change things, right? Okay, go back to the 93. Or maybe you say, you know what? No, I do want to be a bit stricter. I'm going to change that first one to a 90. So obviously your students don't see your grades until they're all graded and then you post them live. But I do think this is important if you have assignments that can be a bit subjective depending on where you're at in your grading mindset. Something to keep in mind, grade as you can as quickly as possible, but also make sure you're keeping consistent when you're giving your grades. Now, return feedback and grades for assignments at least 1 week before the next deadline, especially when the assignments build off one another. And yes, this still definitely is a great tip here because you want to make sure that they can use your feedback for the next assignment. If you have 2 papers that you're giving them and you give them feedback for paper 1 a day before paper 2 is due, it's not going to be much time to integrate your feedback on that first paper into their second. Because if it turns out in paper 1 that their verbs are all passive and you think they should be active, well, now they have to go through their second paper in 1 day or 1 afternoon and change all their verbs, right? So not much time. So definitely plan out your semester, right? That course schedule so you can give feedback in a timely manner, at least a week in between deadlines when they build off one another. So of course, if one assignment is a creative project and then the next one is something very formal and analytical and there's not much connection between them, okay, not as big a deal. But I do think you should at least have that grade to them before the next assignment is due so they know, okay, well, I got an A- on this assignment. I want to increase my grade to at least an A. Make sure I do work really hard on this next one so I can hopefully boost my grade, okay? So they have the knowledge of the first and that can inspire work on the second. So definitely give yourself some time to make sure that you can give things back in a timely manner. And then tip number 10, check out your campus CTLT for resources. So that's the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. Not all campuses have it, but many do. It can be called different things, but basically it's a place where you can get resources to help you with teaching, to help you with how to give feedback to students, how to communicate with them, workshops. Definitely a helpful tool for educators, especially new educators. And in my case, at Illinois State, they had a midterm chat, which was an activity that I really loved doing every semester because it's basically something that you do mid-semester. Someone else comes in and facilitates a discussion with your students, get a sense of how are things going, right? What can be done to improve the course on their end and on your end. So I do have links here so you can see exactly what it means. I had videos about midterm chats as well, but definitely see on campus what free resources are available to you as an instructor and use them, right? If they're there, why not take advantage? And so this is just one example of what's offered by a CTLT, but it's one that I think you should really take advantage of because it makes sure it can help you get higher evals at the end of the semester because you course corrected mid-semester. So if it turns out that, one of their feedbacks is, I'm super confused by the way you design something, well, then you can change the design or you can explain the design better mid-semester. And so going forward, that thing is fixed. So it's not something that you find out the last day of class when they say, I was super confused, this was terrible, right? So that's my 10th tip here in this particular blog post, okay? So of course, you can go ahead and read the more detailed version here. I'll link it below, but that's just one approach to giving tips a few years ago. And then kind of switching over here, so 7, right, a few less, high flex teaching tips after a long semester. So I taught high flex all of last year. So the fall and the spring, I had a few students in person in the fall, the rest on Zoom. And in the spring, I had most in person and a few on Zoom. So what did I learn from this experience? So I do have a whole playlist about hybrid or high flex teaching. I have a collection of activity ideas as well that I'll link below in case you want access to that. But the first things here I mentioned are 2 helpful physical items, and that's a water bottle and a really, wearable friendly mask. So water bottle, you're gonna get really parched because of speaking through a mask. You really get a very dry mouth because of it. So having your bottle easy to access, you can drink, constantly. Have one with a spout so you can just sip underneath your mask rather than having to remove the mask to drink, right? I have a video about mask wearing when teaching that goes over this, but definitely have one with you all the time. And then find a mask that works well for you, one that you can speak through pretty clearly, one that doesn't feel too heavy when you're speaking. I never got it perfect, but some experimentation because it's going to be very tiring to wear a mask when teaching. So 2 items definitely that you need for the high flex situation. And then 2 activities that could potentially be beneficial when you start and end your classes. So the first one is what is called a bell ringer activity. So a short individual task you have students do. And this was helpful because you have people coming on Zoom a bit late, like they're trying to sign in, a Wi-Fi issue, they're going through the waiting room. And so usually when it's face-to-face, I start class immediately on class time beginning. You have to be there the whole time we're getting started. But when it's high flex, I would wait a minute or 2 or 3 for any stragglers, both in person or on Zoom. So you could potentially do like a non-graded short activity, maybe a free write, a prompt to get them in the headspace for the class period, and it's low stakes, right? Because it's not something that's graded, but something that students who are there can do. And then you go into the lesson once you wait a few minutes for your students to show up potentially a little bit late. So, better than just like sitting in silence. I guess you can just have students chit-chatting the first few minutes of class too. But I think it can be great for like getting them into like, all right, today's class is focusing on characterization of the characters in this novel. Why don't we go ahead and do a little prompt while you're sitting there about designing your own character for a YA novel that you're gonna potentially write, right? That's something to consider if you're gonna wait a few minutes for the ones coming in late. And then the second activity is an exit card. Okay, so this can be used really easily with Kahoot or with Pear Deck. Again, 2 different tools that I have videos about. Actually, tomorrow's video is a Pear Deck tutorial. But in here, you can have, okay, so the end of the class comes, or maybe the end of the week comes, and you have a quick question, right? And so that might be what most confused you about the lecture today. And you can have students respond to that. Or what did you find the most interesting about today's lesson? And they can answer that. You might have, okay, would you rather spend more time talking about thesis creation, close reading, or writing analysis, right? And so students answer 1 or 2 questions at the end of the class period or the end of the week, and okay, next class period or next week, let's focus on these things because they're confused by them or because they're interested in them or what have you. So I do think it can work well to keep things consistent. And if you do it digitally with Pear Deck or Kahoot, then it's very easy to do it in the high flex situation because students just log in, whether they're in person or on Zoom, and it's simple. Of course, this is if you're somewhere where you can have access to Wi-Fi. If not all students have devices they can use, they can always team up potentially to answer these questions and have like a little like Erica says this and John says that in their response. You could always take, call of hands for those who couldn't actually use a device. What was your answer, A, B, or C? So there's a few tweaking if you have Wi-Fi issues. But if not, I do think this can be really helpful to get a sense of how the class is doing. Okay, so after that, recording lecture portions of class, I do think is something, maybe you have to record. I don't know what your policy is at your university, but in my case, I recorded the lecture portions so that anybody who's absent or anybody who was there but not paying attention or was flustered or was sleepy or whatever, they can go to the Canvas LMS website and see my lectures later on. I didn't record class discussion because it can be really a struggle to get them to speak up in a discussion. So I didn't want to say like, I'm also recording you, it's going to be on this website in perpetuity. It was only me speaking, right? And yes, sometimes they ask a question, but they weren't on camera. It's usually, you can't usually hear them very well either if you're in the back of the room. But I went ahead and recorded my lectures and posted them on the class website so they can rewatch it as they needed to, throughout the semester. So consider, in your case, what might you record in your HyFlex class? Now, Kahoot is probably my students' favorite tool and one that I really enjoyed using as well, but not just for games, right? It doesn't have to be just for quizzes. I think it can be great for student feedback as well. So there's various ways of using Kahoot. I have videos about this as well. So you can use it as a quiz, right? You can use it as a foundation for a discussion. So you might have a prompt and say, what do you want to discuss first? A, B, C, or D? And then you start with the one that has the most votes, right? So there's those options. But it can also be good for student feedback, right? So it might be, all right, we just finished this assignment. What did you think was the hardest thing about it? A, B, C, or D? And then once you get that answer, okay, well, assignment 2 still uses the C thing, and it was voted as the hardest thing. I'll make sure we spend more time on that in class going forward. So you can get a sense, again, kind of like a midterm chat in that other website, in that other blog post. You can use Kahoot for this. Let's get some anonymous feedback, or if you want their names attached, they can use their names as their nickname to get a sense of how it's going and what can be changed in the future, or what should stay the same in the future as well. Okay. Sending weekly check-in emails. Obviously, we're all really busy and all really overwhelmed, but if possible, I do think this can be helpful. So if you have students who are absent for large chunks of time, checking in is obviously pretty critical. And so in my case, if the student was gone both days of the week, that would be assigned to me, okay, maybe I should email them, right? If they're gone one day, that, things happen. But if they're gone a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, every week, I'd be like, okay, well, can you check in with me? What's going on, right? So you can decide when you should start being concerned and start emailing. Maybe you would wait 2 weeks of absence before you say anything. But I think it can be helpful to make sure, that as few students fall behind as possible, because they know that you're concerned. They know that you're there. And one way of doing that is through email, right? I'm not saying force them to come to office hours, but at least give a little sign like, hey, just checking in. Is everything okay? Do you have any questions about, the assignment? Here, is a quick thing that you missed this week. If you want to discuss it one-on-one, we can Zoom or we can meet during my office hour, whatever you want to write in this email. Something to consider, especially for those who are always on Zoom. I think it's easy to lose them because maybe you have a black screen for all of them, so you never actually see them. They rarely speak. So if you have that kind of concern, check-in emails obviously can be very helpful. So those are 7 tips here with the HyFlex situation, which I'm not sure how many of you are doing, but if you are, and if you haven't done it before, then these are a few things to keep in mind. Though if you do go ahead and go up and you do the select categories, and there's one teaching with technology, there's also the successful start for what I mentioned earlier in the live stream. But if you do teaching with tech, then you can see all of my blog posts tied in basically to this past year of teaching. So I have the HyFlex tips. I also have ideas for student engagement, ideas for better video lessons if you're doing it fully online, if you're doing a lot of video for your hybrid class. So definitely just different ideas for the situation, right? Things that I learned throughout the past year. So that is under one category in case you want to focus on that. And again, if you'd rather focus on just designing in general, you've never designed a course before, then you can go to the successful start and learn from there, right? Just go all the way down, obviously, to step 1, or the one that's about getting the workbook, okay? And then finally, of course, this channel is a source for you to use. If you go to my playlist, you can see plenty here. I do try to differentiate as much as I can. So ed tech tutorials only, or if you're completely new, these are ones that I thought were particularly beneficial for new instructors, specifically about grading strategies and assessment, right? Canvas LMS tutorials, in case you haven't used Canvas before to create a class website. So you can just go through icebreaker ideas. I have 6 videos of icebreaker ideas, and so on, right? So high flex teaching, if you go back here, productivity tips, teaching, writing your literature. I have a lot available. Recently in July, I did the Assignments Jumpstart 2021. So that was every week, had a different theme: college basics, writing, literature, and multimedia. And so on Tuesdays, I had tools or resources that are free for those teaching of those topics. And then on Fridays, I had 3 assignment ideas for each of those topics. There's also a teachable course connected to that where you can get the assignment sheet templates for those 12 assignments in that course. So I have that link below as well, right? But this is just a few teaching tips, as you get started in teaching in the fall if you've never taught before. I am wrapping up here, so if you have any questions that you want to ask me, my comment section is open in the live chat. Go ahead and send me those so I can answer them live. I'll wait a minute or two to see if anybody has those. But while I'm waiting, this is just definitely a few tips that I have. I do think, it can be very stressful when you're not sure what the situation is going to look like yet, because obviously things right now are a bit flexible as far as how we're going to be teaching. Is it going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be high flex? Is it going to change in week 3? So I think that if you go in with a game plan and have a lot of flexibility built in, breaks in your course schedule in case you fall behind, so you don't have to cut things out. You have breaks built in, or also figure out, okay, what can I cut out if it turns out that we need more time for Unit 1? These elements can be cut out. They're not essential to the learning goals. So as much as you can lesson plan and scaffold now to get a sense of, this is what my semester I like it to look like, the ideal, but then also here's my fallback plan, right? Here are things that I can cut if needed. Here are breaks that I can add in if needed. So you have, a little flexibility in the design of your course. Okay, so again, tomorrow will be a Pear Deck tutorial video. Next week on Tuesday, I'll actually have a video for students. So one of the assignment jumpstart videos is about teaching your students college basics and also giving ideas to your freshmen of tools to use for their college experience. And so I'm going to actually have a tutorial for Trello for students, a tutorial for Notion for students, and a tutorial about the Pomodoro technique for students. So those will be coming out on Tuesdays, and then Fridays will be the usual teaching tips video for instructors. But if you do want to share those videos with your students, feel free. They're designed to be for students, not for my ever educating viewer. So you'd notice that it's designed a bit differently. There's no me speaking and talking about, what's happening on this channel. It's just any instructor who wants to use this for their students. In case you want to tell them about Trello, they can just use that one. And again, for Notion and the Pomodoro technique as well. All right, so I don't see any comments here. I'm going to go ahead and go on back to just me. And so, if you want to connect, then we can go ahead and see me on Twitter or Instagram at EverEducating. I do tend to check my DMs, right? And if you have any questions about teaching or looking for specific tips or advice, you can let me know there, and I'll get in touch if I have a blog post or YouTube video, one of the resources connected to that particular topic. Okay, so I'll be putting up the poll for what topic you want to cover in the August live stream later on this week. So usually the community votes. I chose this month because it's obviously right before the semester began, but you'll be able to choose what the August theme is for the live stream. And then we'll go forward, with that same kind of structure of always having a poll going forward. You'll see that in the community tab. So if you're not a subscriber yet, now's the time. Please like this video if that's the end. I would really appreciate that. And again, I have tons of videos and playlists linked below to help you get started if you're new to teaching. So good luck as the semester begins in these next couple weeks.